Good morning. Welcome everybody to our next edition of the Garden and Country Extension webinar series. We got Gail Gratop with us from the Coconino County Master Gardener Program, and she's going to be talking about native plants for Arizona mountain landscaping. Just a little bit about these webinars. They are a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11 in Arizona, featuring a variety of horticultural, natural resource topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County and anywhere else in the world or state that those things may apply. And a recording of this will be posted to my website, extension.arizona.edu/Gila, or feel free to email me at ckjones@arizona.edu. We have a YouTube playlist that all these webinars go to first. And so let me know and I'll share that with you. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. And with that, I'm going to take that cue and share our AAP5 poll. So if you would kindly take just a moment to answer those three questions. I'll take them back down after when Gail gets started here. Just go ahead and let me know how old you are and so on. So I really appreciate you doing that. Gail and I need to report on that type of information, so it means a lot to us. Back to the slides here. Here's our agenda for today. Thank you for everybody who came on a little early for our login and lag time. My name is Chris Jones. I'm giving your welcome. I'm your moderator. Today's topic is native plants for Arizona mountain landscaping with Gail Gratop. She has roughly 30 minutes. She says she may get excited and talk a little bit longer, but just go ahead and put your questions into the chat box or in the Q&A, because we want to have some time for Gail to answer your questions. And then we'll wrap up at noon and we'll end the program. And here is Gail J. Gratop, our presenter. She's the Instructional Specialist Coordinator for the Master Gardener Program, the Coconino County Cooperative Extension, the University of Arizona. And Gail, thanks for sharing such a fine picture. I was able to get a lot of distance up, able to do a lot with it. I had our Kelly Block down there saying she wanted to promote it. Can you send me another picture and make it landscape? I just took that and made it landscape. It worked just fine. Oh, welcome. How are you doing, Gail?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Glad to see that we have a pretty big audience, because to me that means that people are really excited about learning how to garden with native plants. And that is one of my goals here as a grower up in northern Arizona, is to get to be able to get native plants into people's hands so then they can put them in the garden, because they are really amazing in your garden. So I'm going to close out your poll. Should I start sharing my screen now?
Yeah, go ahead and share your screen and I'll end that poll. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, can everybody see?
I can see and hear you fine, so we can put some information in the chat if necessary.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming to my talk about gardening with native plants in northern Arizona, or in the mountain regions of Arizona. And I really like to start off with this slide, because these are all very showy, beautiful native plants that you can find pretty easily in the nursery trade, so at your local nurseries. So for today's talk, we have just a few objectives just to let you know where we're going. We're going to discuss the benefits of gardening with native plants. And with that, we'll identify some of the resources that we have for obtaining native plant material, because I know that that can be pretty hard to find true native plants out here. But I'm going to give you guys some good resources during this talk. We'll briefly talk about how you can start your own native plant garden in your yard or wherever you're wanting to grow your native plants. We'll differentiate a true native plant from a cultivar or a cultivated variety, which is typically what you find in the nursery trade. But I'm going to give you guys some clues on how to differentiate our true natives from species that have been selected for specific traits. So they're cultivars. And then at the most of this talk is going to be all about looking at some really pretty slides and photos of some native plants that are appropriate for our area and ones that you can actually find in the nursery trade. Okay, people are probably aware of the benefits that come along with gardening with native plants. Number one, our native plants, especially if you're buying them from a local grower, are adapted to our local climate. So we all know as gardeners here, the higher elevations of Arizona, we are faced with some pretty challenging growing conditions, from it being very intense sunlight at our higher elevations. We live in a very arid region. We have huge day and night temperature swings. So it's just really challenging to be a gardener here. But when you use native plants, they're adapted to those specific conditions. Native plants are good for lower water use in your garden. So I think that a pretty big misconception is that you don't have to water native plants, but of course you do, especially when we're faced in times of extreme drought, which we've been in for several years now. They will need supplemental water, but they are lower water use when compared to a lot of other plants that you can buy. They're good for our native pollinators. We hear a lot about the decline of our pollinators due to habitats being destroyed, pesticides, and a plethora of other reasons. So you can really help out our native pollinators by plugging native plants into your garden. Native plants require less pesticides typically and fertilizers. Our native plants are adapted to our very lean soils here in Arizona. So there is not a lot of need to dump fertilizers, especially chemical fertilizers, on our native plants, because they actually won't be happy. And then they can handle insect pressure a lot better than other plants that are non-native. And of course, when you're gardening with native plants, instead of just say a lawn, you're promoting biodiversity by not growing a monocrop like a lawn in your yard. So you're able to bring in those native pollinators and help out some of our native wildlife. So a big issue is, where do we get these native plants? And I hear this a lot, especially as when I was a grower at the Arboretum. I would get that question a lot. You had to be very opportunistic to get native plants at the Arboretum because they only had their plant sales once or twice a year. So in the meantime, where can you find these plants? Well, the Arb in Flagstaff has a plant sale twice a year. So that's a place that you could get native plants. Borderlands Restoration down in Patagonia, Arizona is pretty similar to the Arboretum. They're a nonprofit. They grow locally sourced native plants, and they're also a nonprofit, and they get those plants out into the community. Warner's Nursery up here in Flagstaff, they have Verde River Growers, who's down in Cottonwood. They grow a lot of native plants that are appropriate for the higher elevations and then send them up to Warner's to sell. Viola's Nursery in Flagstaff is doing a really great job of selling plants from small local backyard growers. So you can find native plants there with them. And then Plant Fair Nursery in Payson. I've never been there, but I hear from the students in the online Master Gardener class that come from Gila or down there that they have a pretty decent selection. If you want to buy online, High Country Gardens, which is in Santa Fe, has a lot of really great true natives and cultivated natives. And then Mountain States Wholesale Nursery down in Glendale, Arizona, also sells native plants for higher elevations, and then they ship them up to our nurseries up here in northern Arizona. So that's where you can get native, like actual native plants, potted plants, but people are capable of growing their own plants at home. And with that, here are some great resources where you can get some native seed. High Country Gardens, we mentioned them on the previous slide. You can also buy seed from them. They have a great website, so check it out. Western Native Seed, which is in Colorado, has a really great selection of native seed that you can buy. And so does Plants of the Southwest, who's in New Mexico. And all three of those shops, you can buy either individual species in packets, or they also have grass and wildflower mixes in bulk that you can purchase, especially if you have a big pasture or area that you want to reseed. If you care about good provenance, which is a good thing to care about, so that just means knowing exactly where your seed has been produced or collected from. Al Plains is a really great resource because he goes out and he wild collects all of his seeds, and he has the exact location of where he made those collections. So you could match your climate to where he is collecting his seeds from, just to give your plants a better chance of adapting to your garden. Another great resource for getting seeds is from your local seed library. So if anybody is in Flagstaff, we have our Grove Flagstaff Seed Library. We just had an article in the Arizona Daily Sun all about wildflower seeds, and a lot of local gardeners from Flagstaff collected seeds from their yard and made them available for the public through our seed library. With that said, you can also collect seeds off of your own plants or get some from your neighbor. Maybe your neighbor has the penstemon that you've always wanted. Just maybe go over and make friends and start sharing seeds with each other. So starting a native plant garden is pretty easy. You can incorporate native plants into your existing garden, or you can start from scratch. If you're starting from scratch, you might need to prepare the soil, and that's mostly just removing weeds. Though I did have a situation at my house where my garden was covered in weed cloth and river cobble for 35 years, and I removed all of that and was very hesitant about putting too much amendments in my soil because I knew I was going to plant natives. But looking back, I wish I would have added more because that soil was pretty much toast. So your plants will need nutrients, but just remember that to not put too much fertilizer in there because they won't be happy. Select plants that are suitable for your area. So really consider your microclimates in your yard. So what kind of soils do you have? What gets the most light? What gets shade? And then also think about the watering needs of your plants. So maybe put plants that require a little more water next to each other, so then you can deliver water appropriately to all of those species. When you're planting, we always recommend to plant during monsoon season to help conserve water. And your plants will be a lot happier if you wait until monsoon. Think about what it's like in May and June here. It's super hot, it's dry, it's windy. You're just going to be dumping a lot more water on your plants than is necessary. So if you wait till monsoon, your plants are going to perk right up. They're going to be a lot happier. They're not going to struggle as much. If you're sowing seed, it's best to sow them in the late fall or in the winter, right before we're supposed to get our first snowstorm, because most of our perennial seeds most of our perennial plants need seed treatments. And what that means is that those seeds need some sort of environmental trigger in order to break dormancy. So that could be a cold, wet period. It could be freeze thaw. It could be rubbing from ice and snow melting and then refreezing. So keep that in mind. When you're planting individual potted plants, it's always a good thing to mulch them, but be careful not to put the mulch too close to the crown of a plant because they will not be happy, and they will most likely rot out. And remember that it usually takes 3 years for a native plant garden to establish. So you'll have to supplemental water your plants depending on environmental conditions. So if it's really dry, you will most likely need to water them a couple of times a week, or during monsoon, you could probably just taper off if we have a good monsoon. And if we are having a dry fall and a dry winter, you'll still need to add water to your plants. In fact, I did just yesterday because it's been 60 degrees here in Flagstaff. So let's talk about what a native is versus a cultivar. So native plants are plants that are found naturally in the environment without any influence of humans. And the seed that's produced out in the wild is usually true to the parent plant. But there are exceptions. There's always exceptions in botany. A lot of penstemons happen to hybridize. So those seeds, if you collect off of the parent plant, you might not get what is true to the plant that you collected from. It's kind of confusing. But a cultivar is a plant that has been selected by humans for traits that are desired by humans. So maybe more vigor, or a brighter pink color, or bigger leaves, or purple leaves, or variegated leaves. And these plants are typically cloned because they come from some sort of genetic mutation that's not really common in the true natives, and they are propagated by cuttings typically. And then those plants are often patented by a breeder, so it makes it illegal for you to take cuttings off of that plant and then resell them. So an example of that would be Penstemon Pinefolius, Mersea yellow. So here's our native penstemon here. This is Penstemon Pinefolius, a great little penstemon that's got either orange or red flowers. But there was a variant that was found in England in the 1980s, and somebody took cuttings off of it and introduced this Penstemon Mersea yellow into the nursery trade. So anytime that you see the name, so here's the scientific or Latin name, botanical name of the plant, Penstemon Pinefolius. Anytime you see something on your plant tag that has the genus and the species followed by a name in single quotes, that means that you are dealing with a cultivated variety of the plant and not the true native. Okay, so here comes the really fun part. Now we're going to look at true native plants that you can find fairly easily in the nursery trade. So I am a grower, and I've been a horticulturist for a lot of years, so I'm pretty familiar with what you can actually find. And I'm also a gardener, so I'm pretty familiar with what native plants that you can find in the trade. The last thing I want to do is show people all of these really great plants that I love, but then you can't find them anywhere. So these are plants that you can actually find. So this first one is golden currant. Its Latin name is Ribes aureum. It's a great little shrub, and it's got a pretty wide range. It can grow from zones 3, so the lower the number, the more cold tolerant the plant. So zone 3 to zone 8. And this shrub is a native shrub. It can get up to 6 feet tall. It prefers full sun, but it can also handle a little bit of shade. I really like this plant because it has really cute yellow flowers in the spring. And then those flowers, when they go to fruit, are black or kind of purple or red berries that also will attract birds into your yard, and they add other interest in the spring. They actually fruit pretty early as well. And then in the fall, you could get some good foliar color from it. So I really like to select shrubs where you can have year-round or at least 3-season interest. And this is one plant that can do that. This plant can also tolerate clay soils. A lot of us in northern Arizona have clayey soil, so this would be a good choice for you. And out in its natural habitat, it's found in moist soils and canyons from 4,000 to 7,000 feet. So it will need a little more water, but I have one in my yard, and honestly, I don't really water it more than I water anything else, and it does just fine. This is another really beautiful shrub that can be found in the nursery trade. It's a New Mexican locust, or Robinia neomexicana. This is a small shrub or tree. I usually see it growing below 8 feet, but it can create kind of thickets and be kind of weedy. So that is one thing about this plant that might not be desirable, but we tease and say, well, if you have a neighbor that you don't really like very much, you can plant this plant along that fence line because it's very pokey and it can spread pretty easily. But it does, on the good side, it's got these really beautiful showy purple blooms that are so fragrant in the springtime. And those blooms attract bees and hummingbirds into your yard. This plant is very drought tolerant, and it can tolerate a bunch of different soil types. This shrub is called curly-leaf mountain mahogany, or Cercocarpus latifolius. This is probably the most common mountain mahogany that you can find in the trade. I see it usually growing with the pinyon juniper, so at kind of the lower elevations, but it does show up in the ponderosa pine as well. And it's a really hardy shrub that requires full sun. What I like about this the most is that it's got these so it goes to flower, it's got small creamy white flowers, but then when they go to seed, they have these really cool twisty tails that just give a really cool texture and quality to the plant in the fall. So this is actually called an achene. It's just, if you pulled out one of those little tails, the seed would come with it. It'd be attached on the other end. This can handle really dry, nutrient deprived soils, and the soils need to be well draining. And you can see here's a picture of it growing along the edge of the Grand Canyon. That's typically where I've seen it grow a lot in our region. So it can handle some pretty tough exposed conditions from 4,500 all the way up to 9,500 feet. This is a plant that is classified as a subshrub. So it's not really a forb, but it's not really a shrub either. It's like kind of in between, but people really think that it's a grass because of its common name, bare grass. So we'll just call it a grass-like subshrub. It's a Nolina microcarpa. This is one of my favorite plants because it is so unique looking, and it can handle some part shade. It's actually a member of the lily family. So it's got these really beautiful white plumes that it will send out with pretty fragrant little flowers there. When it's not in flower, it's got these twisty, curly little tips of the leaves that I think are really cool looking. They're very drought tolerant, and they can handle rocky soils, which a lot of us have here in northern Arizona. It's found a little lower in elevation. I usually find it below the Mogollon rim, but if you find a little microclimate in your yard, it can survive colder temperatures. For example, there's one growing at the Arboretum that we planted many years ago. And the Arboretum, if any of you are from Flagstaff and here, you know that that is one of the coldest places to garden in Flagstaff. There's actually one of these plants growing in my neighborhood too. They've had it in a half barrel pot for a number of years, and it looks really great. Of course, I have to talk about, that's a good segue, because that plant, it's not a true grass, but it's called bear grass. Now I want to move on to our true native bunch grasses. And I am a sucker for these plants because they are so easy to care for and they are very beautiful and they are all pretty drought tolerant. But if you deliver a little extra water to them, they will be showstoppers in your garden. So blue grama grass, I'm sure many of you in the audience have seen this plant. Bouteloua gracilis. It is a native bunch grass, so that means it doesn't spread out like, well, most of our grasses here in Arizona are bunch grasses, but blue grama is a little different because it can have sod-like qualities. So it can send out some little runners, and that's what makes it a good choice for a native lawn. But it is, when it grows, it's a true bunch grass. It tolerates full sun, and this is a warm season grass. So this means without additional water, it is going to green up during monsoon season. So it's going to do its thing once we get the rains, unless you are giving more water to it in the spring. It's a great ornamental grass to add texture into your garden. That's why I really like grasses, because although they are flowering plants, they look a lot different than a lot of the other showy flowering plants in your garden. This grass can withstand many soil types, from sand to clay to loam. And as I mentioned before, it's a really common grass that you can find it growing in northern Arizona, in open areas, roadsides, and in waste sites from 3,500 to 7,200 feet. Deer grass, or Muhlenbergia rigens, is a very common bunch grass to find in the nursery trade. It grows in zones 6 to 10, so a little warmer. I live in a really warm neighborhood in Flagstaff, so I'm able to pull this one off, and it is actually huge. It got too big for me in the space where I planted it because I have it in full sun, but I also have one in partial sun and it didn't get as big. So it can be a pretty robust grass. It sends up these really cool plumes when it goes to seed, and they can be up to 2 feet tall. So it can be a very wide grass and a very tall grass, especially in full sun. This is also a warm season grass, but it does green up a little earlier in the spring. It will flower though later on in the summertime. Prefers well-drained soils. It can tolerate some clay, and this is typically found in canyon bottoms, so it does require a little more moisture, but I don't really put a lot more water on it than I do any of my other plants, and it does just fine. All right, let's talk about everybody's favorites now. This is probably what you've been waiting for. It's the perennial wildflowers, are really showy, colorful plants. I want to start with Colorado 4 o'clock. So remember, these are pretty easy to find in the trade. So take some notes and look for them in your local nursery or online at High Country Gardens. Mirabilis multiflora is its Latin name. This is a pretty low growing, mounding, spreading plant. So it makes a really great addition for borders. What's really cool about this is that this plant, it has very beautiful, showy purple magenta blooms that bloom later in the afternoon or evening, and that's where it gets its common name, 4 o'clock. So it's pollinated by night pollinators. So you can help out your night pollinators like the hawk moths by adding this plant into your garden. It's found in gravelly and sandy soils, so it needs to be well draining. I planted it in a not so ideal situation in my yard, and it comes back every year, but only as a few leaves. So I don't think it gets enough drainage, and I don't think it gets enough sun. That's supposed to be 5,000 to 8,500 feet. I always forget to change that on this PowerPoint. Let's talk about milkweeds now, because milkweeds are in the news a lot for the benefits they have to pollinators, especially the decline of the monarch butterfly population. So I put 3 in here, and the reason why I put these 3 in here is that this one is really easy to find in the nursery trade, but there are a lot of backyard growers right now that are growing milkweeds that are found in our areas, wherever you are, and up in northern Arizona, like milkweeds for monarchs. They're out of NAU. There's a couple of ladies up outside of Grand Canyon who are growing and selling milkweeds. I've been selling milkweeds that the seeds I've just collected growing out of the sidewalk cracks in my neighborhood. So just trying to get those plants into people's gardens to help our local pollinators, especially monarchs, out. So this first one, as I mentioned before, pretty easy to find in the trade, butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, or I'd like to call it the orange one. It's one of our native milkweeds. I find it growing around Flagstaff when I'm out hiking, but it grows all over in northern Arizona at the higher elevations and also down south. It's got really showy orange flowers that bloom pretty early in the summertime. So that's really great to have plants when you're gardening for pollinators. It's really, and for your aesthetic reasons in your garden, it's nice to pick out plants that bloom at different times throughout the season. So this is a good early showy bloomer. It can tolerate deer, erosion, drought, sand, clay, and lean soil. So a lot of different environmental conditions. As I mentioned before, it will help. It's a great choice for gardening for pollinators, and it helps the monarchs. Here's a plant that gets a really bad rap, and this is the one that I've been growing just from collecting seed in my neighborhood. This is the horsetail milkweed. I think milkweeds get a bad rap, especially this one, because they have weed in their name, number one, but they can be toxic to animals. But it's that toxin that's in the milky sap in the leaves of the plant that actually create a symbiotic relationship with the monarch. So the monarch caterpillars are able to ingest that toxin when they feed off of the leaves of the plant without any harm being done to the caterpillar itself. And then in return, when the adults emerge, they pollinate the milkweed plants. So that's why the relationship between milkweeds and the monarchs is so important. Also, by ingesting that sappy toxin from the plants, the birds know not to eat those caterpillars or else they'll get sick. So it's a pretty cool relationship. This plant is toxic to livestock. So it's in the weeds of the West book. I grow it because I don't have livestock on my land. So that could be a problem. One reason why you might not want to have it, but I'm a sucker for green unnoticed flowers. So if you look at this plant up close or from a distance, it may not look like much, but once you get in there and really look at the flowers, it's just the inflorescence is just made up of a bunch of these really beautiful, showy little flowers that you have to appreciate when you really look at them up close. This is another kind of early bloomer, but it can bloom into the late summer as well. And it's found in a variety of areas, from woodlands to open fields and disturbed areas along roadsides. You see it growing along roadsides a lot. And for that reason, it gets mowed down. So there you're taking away some of the habitat that we really need for the monarch. So if you could find this plant and plant it in your yard, that would really be beneficial. And the last milkweed we're going to look at is Asclepias speciosa, or showy milkweed. And if you've ever seen this out in the wild or in somebody's yard, you really understand where it gets its name. It is a very robust, tall milkweed. It needs full sun, but when it blooms, it has these very large, showy pink blooms that are just spectacular. There's a a good collection of this plant out at the Arboretum at Flagstaff. If you're ever in town, come see them around monsoon season because they are just showstoppers. I have a couple of these in my yard and it took 3 years for them to bloom. So don't get discouraged. A lot of people will get discouraged when they garden with milkweeds because often they won't do anything for a few years. So it can take up to 3 years to get them to flower, but it's well worth the wait. This is the largest of all the milkweeds around, and especially of the 3 that we just looked at. And I haven't really seen it very often growing in the wild, only in a few places, but it can be found in a variety of different woodlands, open fields along streams from 5,000 to 8,000 feet. This is one that you've probably seen before growing along the roadsides. It's a Mexican Hat Ratibota columnifera. This is a perennial that can get up to 3 feet tall, and especially if you're gardening with it and giving it just a little bit of supplemental water, they can be pretty big. These plants are really easy to and fun to collect seed off of. So if you want to recollect seed from your yard and share it with your friends or use it to reseed other areas, this is a really great plant to do that. For the pollinators, love this plant as well. And it can be long blooming. It's one of the first things to bloom and one of the last things to go to seed. You can find it in this red kind of maroon color, yellow, or it can be a combo of both. It's a really good pollinator plant as well. It's super fast growing. It's drought tolerant. They say it's deer resistant. We'll see. Remember, deer and rabbits will eat anything if it's dry and nothing else is green except for your garden. This plant is found in pinyon juniper and ponderosa pine forests, prairies, grasslands, and disturbed areas up to 7,000 feet. Blanket flower, we see this one out a lot. I put this in here because you can find a lot of cultivated varieties of this in the nursery trade. So Arizona Sun is one of the gaillardias that are pretty common to find in the trade. It's actually hard to find the true native in the trade, if not impossible. I grew some, but I don't know a lot of other people who do for sale. It's just hard to get the seed, but there are a lot of different cultivated varieties out there. Super drought tolerant. It really can handle dry conditions, and it really does. It blooms for a really long time. I actually have one that's still blooming in my yard. Butterflies really like things that they can land on. So this is a member of the aster family. So butterflies really visit this plant a lot. So do bees. I have some really great pictures of bees covered in pollen from visiting gaillardia. It does need sun. If you have it in any shade, it will not bloom. And it also needs really lean soils that are well draining, so they don't like to be in clay or anything that's going to hold on to the water a little longer. And you can find these all over Arizona from 1,000 to 8,000 feet. Of course, I have to talk about penstemons, and I'm going to start going a little faster here so we can wrap up and have time for questions. Penstemon Atonei is one of the few penstemons that we can find in the nursery trade. I really like this one because it can handle some shade as well. And penstemons are typically really early bloomers in your yard, which gives the pollinators something to go after in the spring. Hummingbirds really, really love this plant. They love anything that's got those red tubular flowers. Penstemon or firecracker penstemon is extremely drought tolerant. It's sandy to clay soils, but I really think that it prefers sandy soils. I have some in some pretty well draining soil, and it does pretty well there. This plant, Penstemon Pinefolius or pine leaf penstemon, this grows on the Sky Islands down in southern Arizona, so that's more of its range. But we can grow them up here in our gardens. They actually do really, really well. There are a lot of different cultivars of this plant in the nursery trade. There's one that's orange called compactum. There's the Marseille yellow that we already looked at. But if you want the true native, look for it without the single quotes behind the name. They are very, very drought tolerant. And as you can see from these photos, they have many, many, many showy blooms that the hummingbirds love. They're a great addition to a rock garden. I have some planted in a rocky area, and they make a lot of really great border plants because they do grow a little lower. They need well-draining soils. They can handle a little bit of part shade, but they will bloom a lot more if you have them in full sun. Penstemon Palmeri, or I like to call it Penstemon Palmeri, because these are really, really tall. Showy pink Penstemon, Palmer's Penstemon is the common name. You'll find these growing a lot. I think A-dot seeds for them. So you'll see them growing along the roadsides, especially down near Sedona. I've seen them a lot, but they can grow up as high as Flagstaff. They have some growing at the Museum of Northern Arizona. These plants are also really drought tolerant. And when you find them in the wild, they're found in washes, roadsides, canyon floors, and rocky areas. All right, let's talk about we'll wrap up with a couple of plants that can handle shade. So this is golden columbine. This is one of our true natives, Aquilegia chrysantha. You can find this one, especially from your backyard growers. And the Arboretum, I know they grow it a lot, but in the nursery trade, you're going to see a lot of different cultivars of columbines. But this yellow one is one of our true natives. Columbines can handle, well, they prefer part shade, but they can handle some pretty significant sun, especially, well, this one in particular can. And I really like this plant a lot because it's an early spring bloomer. The hummingbirds really like it. And then once the blooms are spent, you can cut them back, and they will typically bloom again after monsoon season. So a great pollinator plant to attract bees and butterflies and hummingbirds into your yard. This plant can tolerate a lot of different soil types as long as they are well drained, but this plant does, it will require a little bit more moisture. But again, I kind of beat my plants up and see how far I can take them, and they do fine with just on my regular watering schedule. So no extra water in my yard anyway. They're typically found at the higher elevations, but you can find them lower, growing in canyons and along springs or just wetter areas. And I believe that this is the last one that I have in here. This is a heuchera, or coral bells. And I put this in here for a couple of reasons. There are a lot of cultivars that you see out there in the trade. Really, the only true native that you'll find in the nurseries is Heuchera sanguinea. And that grows a little bit, well, actually like in Gila County along the Gila River. But that's the flower right here. It's really, really showy, especially for our true natives, which aren't really that showy when they bloom, and they're pretty tiny. Some people think they're kind of boring. I love all native plants, though. I love to root for the underdogs. These things grow in the craziest spots and cracks up on canyon walls and mountains. So I really like them. But the reason why you can find so many in the trade is because there are a lot of different cultivars, and the reason why they bred these was because people thought that they were really boring. So I guess you could think that's really boring. And then they've selected for variants for like purple leaves or brighter flowers. You can find these in a gazillion different colors with the foliage. And now they've selected for bigger blooms, so they make them more attractive in your garden, I guess. I don't know. I still like the true natives, but they can be very drought tolerant. Some cultivars require a little more moisture, and they're also being bred to handle a little more sunshine. But when you're out hiking around, you can find them on rocky outcrops and gnarly places and in shady canyons from 3,500 to 9,500 feet. So here are some of the references that I used. All of these websites are really, really great resources for you. So if you're out shopping for native plants, or you want to learn more about the cultural conditions of what your plants will require, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas has a really great database called wildflower.org, and you can type in either the botanical name or the common name, and they have great photos. And what's most important is that they'll have the cultural conditions of the plant. So what is the plant like? Is it like sun? Is it like water? What kind of soils is it like? And then SciNet is really good. It's kind of more technical, but it does have places where you can find the plants around Arizona. So that's a good resource. The Missouri Botanic Gardens has a really great database too. That's similar to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And then Mountain States Wholesale Nursery, on their website, they have really great informational pages for each of the plant species. Unfortunately, you cannot buy from them because they are a wholesaler, but maybe you can beg your local nursery to buy plants from them, and then you can buy them from your retail nursery. And of course, High Country Gardens is always a great place to check out. And with that, I think we have 15 minutes for questions.
Gail, that's been a lot of fun. It just makes you feel good to know about all these native plants, have you be so excited about sharing about them. But I recognize so many of them, and so many tolerate a wide range of elevations. Not as much as that one from 500 feet to 85,000 feet, but just ones we can use all over the county and the state. So one thing we're going to do, as long as you're willing to stay with us, we're going to get through everybody's questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at the top of the hour, but that doesn't mean take off if you still have questions. Stick around. We're going to start with the Q&A because that's where people put questions in first. And here we go, Gail. So Marion's asking, what are the best milkweed for our monarchs? Will planting onions around them keep away aphids, also keep away monarchs?
I don't know about the onions. What I've found with aphids on milkweeds, especially our natives, is that if you just wash them off with a hose or squish them, that's a good way to kind of keep the population in check. But the milkweeds, they always have aphids on them in nature and in your garden. And typically I don't see much damage from aphids on the plant. They've kind of evolved together. So for me, when I'm growing them, they always get aphids on them, and then I'm treating them there because they're smaller seedlings that are weak. But I think with the mature plants, they can handle a little bit of that pressure. So I don't know, that probably doesn't answer your question, but maybe it will a little bit.
One thing I would wonder, I remember finding a great little extension bulletin from Colorado where they talked about all the different species of aphids. And there are like 24 or more in the Southwest here. So that aphid that you may see on your milkweed may not have any interest in your garden. It could, I mean, there's just so many aphids out there that you think, oh, that's just bad, but they're specific to their hosts. And when some are generalists too, some are real pain.
Yeah, and I typically see the orangish oleander milkweed or oleander aphid on the milkweeds. And I don't really see them on any other plants in the garden.
And as far as the best milkweed, all of them are the best, right?
Yeah, there are, if you do a little internet search with like the Forest Service or, resources that are research-based, like the Fish and Wildlife Service, they have a lot of information on milkweeds, and they have species lists that are broken down by region. So There are some in northern Arizona that were not included in my talk that are also good. So I would just go ahead and search, do that little search with the Forest Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service or Milkweeds for Monarchs, and they have those regional lists. But they aren't inclusive because they don't have the horsetail milkweed on them. Though there are publications that support that the horsetail, the white one or green one, is beneficial to the monarchs as well.
I'd say if you get it to thrive in your garden, use it.
Yeah.
So Christine here is next. She is moving to Nutrioso, if you're familiar where that is, out past
like by New Mexico.
Yeah, White Mountains.
Yeah.
7,500 feet. They have a year-round creek running through their property. She wants to try planting some garden plants along the creek. Asparagus, mint, columbine. I hope this will save space. Will this work? You have lots of elk. I'd say keep mint out of that creek because it's going to go everywhere. Mm-hmm. What thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I would, a lot of mints can be invasive. So I probably wouldn't do that because it will spread, especially in water, or just keep moving down the creek. I think columbines would do really well. What else do? Bee balms, I think, can handle a little bit of moisture, the native one. Oh boy, this is, I mean, I'm immediately thinking of like willows and shrubby plants, honestly, more than the forbs. Carex. But see, these are, I don't know if you can really find, dogwood. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can find carex in the trade. I grow it. I grow some carex for sale. But yeah, I would say do a little research, make sure what you're planting is not invasive because that will become a big problem, not only for you, but also wildlife, neighbors, other plants.
Yeah, watch out for invasive species particularly. And I think Siberian elm would probably like it up there too, but it could be a problem. So watch those. Okay, so Judy has my question. What's the story of the plant on the raft?
Oh, haha.
Picture, yeah.
So yeah, all right. That is a good question. I changed a little bit of the wording on my slide because I didn't have, this was a kind of a shorter presentation. But native plants are also really great for habitat restoration, and there is a big push now to especially when you're a land manager working for somebody like the Park Service, the Forest Service. That was a picture from Grand Canyon. We did a restoration project where we collected plants specifically from the site that we were restoring or rehabilitating, grew those out in the nursery, and then boated them down the Colorado River and planted them there in a way to preserve the genetic integrity of the plants of that area. So instead of buying a cottonwood from Home Depot and bringing it into the Grand Canyon, we knew exactly where our plants came from because they came from the site. So we're not mixing foreign genes with the genetics of our true native plant populations.
Good. Okay, so Bobby's question is, can you recommend a good native plant seller for the low desert? I think of our the desert botanical garden. We've got the Boyce Thompson Arboretum out here in Superior. Mountain States Nursery is out there in Avondale. So have you got any ideas for native plant sellers for the low desert?
I don't. I just don't know very many growers down there. I know Patagonia, but that's a little higher.
Higher elevation, yeah. And so I guess we're gonna have to refer you to our Master Gardener program in Maricopa County. I saw Michael Chamberlain's name on here, so if you can put something in the chat box, that would be good. And along the same line, Marion's asking, any Prescott, Arizona native nurseries? Warner's is out there. Are they pretty good for that?
Well, there's one in Prescott, and I meant to put it on this slideshow. But I'm not sure what it's called, but there is one that is in Prescott and they sell natives. I just don't know the name of it.
Okay. And another one from Marion, is there something I can plant to lure the bees away from my hummingbird feeders?
Oh.
Think
Well, the bees love the Gaillardia. I know that. You can experiment with that.
yeah, once the bees find those hummingbird feeders, they know
Yeah.
where they are. Good luck. And Peggy's asking when to harvest blue grama seeds.
Good question. So they typically, well, up here, they typically go to seed in the late fall. So that is a really great time to harvest. They've dropped. I've been noticing them. When I walk around, I always look at things that are in seed and native plants and what they're doing. And it seems like all of ours around Flagstaff have dropped already, but we were collecting in petrified forest a couple of weeks ago, and I was getting at the lower elevation. So
right. So yeah, so I'd say just watch for when they start to turn to straw, and you still have a little bit of color on the leaf, but when they start turning to straw, then you because otherwise they're going to start dropping the seed. They're not going to be on the flag anymore.
Yeah, when they curl too, that's a good indicator.
Okay, and watch for the curl. And Peggy also asks, are Colorado 4 o'clocks poisonous?
Oh,
I've heard they're hallucinogenic. Michael might know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have to look that up. Nyctag. That's the family. I'd have to see if plants in that family are toxic. Good question. I don't know. I'm going to look it up when we get off of this.
Yeah. Okay. So Marion, still, I have a video of a pack rat harvesting my horsetail milkweed, one stalk at a time.
Huh.
It cuts about 5 inches from the ground and walks off with it.
Huh.
She's going to live trap and rehome the critter.
Good idea.
Good. And she also has an 18 far-spaced native antelope horn milkweed.
Ooh, I love those.
Has the antelope horn and have not seen any monarch activity around them, but I guess they need to find them.
Yeah, probably, because I was looking on the lists this morning that I've referred to you guys to with the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service, and the antelope horns was on there. I know that Michael Wagner from Milkweed for Monarchs, he grows that and sells it. And that's actually one of my favorite milkweeds because I love green flowers.
And that's Michael Wagner.
Mm-hmm. Mike Wagner, yeah, he used to be a professor, an entomology professor. Maybe you had him.
I did. He was my professor. He talked me into joining the Peace Corps. So yeah, if you can get anything from Mike Wagner, good man. All right, Peggy, are there native purple blue penstemons?
Yes, there are. Of course, you're gonna. I'm not gonna know the common names. But Penstemon oleganthus is a purple one. Penstemon strictus, which is a Rocky Mountain penstemon. You can find that one in the trade. It's not native to here, but it's native to the Rocky Mountain region. And it does really well here. You'll see it along the roadsides too. So that's a purple blue. And Penstemon lineareoides. I don't know the common name. That one, it can be purplish blue. You can find that one around.
Oh, okay. So I'm glad. Hope you got that, Peggy. Got those names down. Look, another question or another comment or question. She has a oleander red black bugs on her milkweed. Any ideas on how to get rid of them without disturbing the monarchs, or are they an issue when they're there?
I like to knock the populations back, and I think that the safest way to do that is to honestly just hose them off and squish them. I mean, my fingers in the summer are yellow and it doesn't even gross me out anymore at all. It's actually kind of fun. They pop. It sounds gross. It's kind of gross, but it's satisfying. So you can just do some mechanical removal.
You got it. Pop them in your fingers.
Yeah.
You don't lick your fingers afterwards, though.
I do not lick my fingers, but they are stained yellow for a while.
Okay, so going over to the chat here for a bit. Aside from the perennial milkweed, are there any other plants I need to be concerned about regarding toxicity for your livestock? There are lots of plants, but not necessarily the native ones you're listing.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see. I'll have to think back to my range days. Local weed. But yeah, local weed, that's poisonous to livestock, right? I don't know, did they go after, I'm thinking about plants in the Solanaceae, so nightshades. There's like a little yellow one that's got spikes on it. I can't think of its buffalo bird nightshade, maybe that. But these aren't ones that you're going to be buying the plant. Well, I mean, I've grown the local weed at the Arboretum, but you won't find that anywhere else probably.
So, okay. So, and Shelley asks, can you put all the links into the chat and send them to us? To tell you what, Shelley, email me and we'll see if we can get that onto the website as far as some of these links and information from and then we're also going to post this to the internet and be able to go to that slide and be able to find those links. Any other comments on how we can share these links?
I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. And Joe's asking, do you have recommendations for a cold hardy succulent? Like a Perry's agave, right?
Yeah, a lot of cacti, like our prickly pear. I have those growing in my garden, and they have the showiest early blooming blooms that the bees love to get into. There's a lot of sedums that are sedums are native, but finding the native sedums in the nursery trade is going to be hard, but there are a lot of cultivars that are really pretty and easy to find.
Another easy grower that tolerates high elevation is that Hesperaloe.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Easy to grow, tolerates a lot of cold. Okay, so Michael's asking, is the cold microclimate at the Arboretum useful for XC2 cultivation of alpine species from the San Francisco peaks, which are threatened by a warming climate?
Oh yeah, so there's have you heard of this Sega garden?
Sega?
So, yes, Southwestern Garden Array, and that's a study on climate change, and they've been doing research there. It's with NAU, but it's on property, and I think that they're looking at climate change and how plants are adapting to it. So I think that they've planted, I can't remember exactly how it works, but they're not actually growing plants there for research, the Arboretum, but they are working with NAU to do some of those studies. I would look up the Sega, Sega, I think it's Sega Garden, and see what they're doing.
Okay.
There are multiple gardens across the state.
And how do you spell Sega?
I think it's the Southwest Garden Array, maybe, is like the acronym.
All right, that's good. I think Michael can find that. And all right, so when we were talking about places in Prescott, Paula said Highland Center in Prescott buys from Mountain States for their plant sales. Laura offers that the Native Garden store in Prescott, Arizona has some of the native plants on your list. Wonderful, helpful information. And Joe's asking, I have lots of hollyhocks in the yard that were not planted by myself. Is there a native hollyhock?
There are not native hollyhocks, but there are a lot of natives in that family. And hollyhocks, though they can be quite showy, they can also be very weedy. I have the same problem. I've never planted them, but they pop up and I promptly dig them out because I just don't want to deal with them. A weed is any plant that you don't want. But that is in the Malvaceae, so the mallow family, and globe mallow is in that family. What else? Checker mallow, that's a native. That's in that family. Yeah, so there are natives that are related to it, but hollyhock is not native.
Good. Okay, so Laura asks when is the Flagstaff Arboretum plant sale?
So they used to do only one, and it was it is because it's still going on, typically in July, like the first or second week in July. And the reason why they do that is because they really want to promote planting during monsoon season. And then while I was there, they added a spring plant sale, and that, I mean, it worked okay, but I would set up all my plants that I barely had hardened off, and then they would get dumped on Memorial Day weekend because the weather is just so crazy around here. And then they started they got rid of that one, and then they started a fall one this year. But the tried and true is going to be the July plant sale. And then let's see, I have been selling my plants. They were ready this year around the same time in August at the farmers market. And there's also some other small backyard growers in Flagstaff anyway that show up at the farmers market as well. The master gardeners typically have a plant sale. Of course, we didn't have it last year due to COVID. But that is usually the first week in June.
Lots of opportunities.
Yeah, especially for like those supporting those smaller growers. Yeah, go to your farmers markets, or sometimes local nurseries will have Viola is really good about that in Flagstaff. I realize not everybody here is from Flagstaff, but those are just the places that I know.
Yeah, no, we've got people from all over, so it's been really good. So Liz is asking, how often are you watering now in Flagstaff? You've got 20s at night and 50s during the day, no rain or snow. It was just enough that you felt like your plants needed some water though.
Yeah, so when I removed that weed cloth, this is a valuable lesson that I learned. So when I removed my weed cloth and gravel, and the soil was just nothing but gray dust, I really, really wish that I would have put more amendments in there, because my situation the soil in my yard does not hold enough water. So that's my problem. So I'm putting more water on my plants than I normally should, just because of the soil. The soil is still not great. I mean, the plants do fine, but I do have to water more. So that's my situation. I think it just depends on your soil. And so if you have a clay soil, it's going to hold water more, and you won't have to be watering it as much as somebody like me who's got a garden in full sun and really poor soil that drains quickly.
I'd just say, we haven't had any moisture since, like you said, a month ago or a few weeks ago, quite a while. So keep an eye on these storms. We may want to do some irrigation in December and again in January or February. So just let's see if we don't get any moisture. That just really sets up a lot of our plants for failure.
Yeah, it's so true. Even natives. Yeah, yesterday when I was watering, I was like, I think the last time I watered was probably middle of October, maybe. And I was thinking yesterday, I hope I'm not doing this in December too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So every 6 weeks or so, it's probably a good idea if we don't get any precipitation. Margaret, do you know of any native plants that could be planted among Bermuda grass that will take over?
Ooh.
Nothing takes over Bermuda grass. I can hope. She's right. He always wins. No, and that was, Margaret, that's actually a question that I thought of also, because you've got a lot of invasive noxious plants up there in Flagstaff these days too, with the diffuse knapweed and other gotten hold. So you're just have to stay on top of them and pull them out, right? Or what do you, because,
Recommend for weeds? Are you
yeah,
saying-
that could be a whole presentation here.
Oh, yeah, yeah. With the knapweed, that's a biennial. So yeah, cut the flowers off and don't let it go to seed. And then we apply herbicide to the rosettes around here. If you have a huge population, sometimes, hand pulling isn't really feasible. So yeah, just don't let them go to seed. And like what Chris said, that could be a talk in itself.
Yeah. Bobby mentioned she's over in Yuma. I think we were asking about low elevation stuff. Janine Lane is our master gardener coordinator for Yuma County. And Michael Chamberlain put his email into the chat at mchamb@email.arizona.edu. He's our commercial horticulture agent in Maricopa County. So 2 good resources there. Joe mentions native plants on Montezuma in Prescott. Paula mentions Native Gardens sells natives in Prescott. And Andy Medina puts the address here, Native Gardens, 602 South Montezuma Street, Prescott. So we got Prescott taken care of here, yay. Marion's asking if 4 o'clocks are invasive in Prescott. I'm gonna say it just depends on, do they have water? Right? They shouldn't, I don't think they should be particularly invasive.
Yeah, I haven't really seen them growing to the point where they're like out competing everything else. They can get big. I've seen them big.
And the seeds can pop up elsewhere, but I think you can control them simply by pulling them and not letting them take off. But they're not going to tolerate if it's too dry. She uses a kill cup with soap and water to flip those oleander bugs into, drown those milkweed bugs. So yeah, that's another way, the soap and water. That's maybe she's giving that as a suggestion to you, Gail.
Yeah. I'll just dip my yellow fingers in the soapy water when I'm done squishing.
And Mike says, Arizona milkweeds for monarchs. We'll be doing a plant sale on April 16 at the Big Park Community Garden at the Village of Oak Creek.
Yes.
We will offer many milkweed species and other native pollinator plants for the 4,000 to 5,000 foot elevation. So April 16 sounds like a nice time to go to Oak Creek.
Yes, they grow beautiful plants. When I was a horticulturist at the Arboretum, I quit growing them because milkweed for monarchs did such a great job. And then I would just sell their plants at our plant sale.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we'll try to help get that word out through our listservs and help share that.
Yeah, and I have a lot of great variety too.
Okay, Peggy mentions another great native flower. What do you think of Indian paintbrush?
Yes, so that is a very beautiful flower, but it takes a really special circumstance in order for it to grow. So it is a hemiparasitic plant. So that means that it's not fully parasitic, but it does attach to roots of another plant in order to get nutrients. So when I used to grow it at the Arboretum, I would get really good germination, and I would always sow the seeds along with blue grama grass. I would sow them together and I would get really good germination. However, when I would outplant them, the paintbrush would always die. So they don't really like to be transplanted. From my experience, and I've also heard that as well, I've never tried to direct sow the seeds out in a yard or a garden. I'm curious about it. I don't really have the right conditions to do that, but it does need another plant to grow.
But it's parasitic, just makes it kind of more of a challenge to grow. So thanks for sharing that, because you see it wild in the woods, but seldom in people's yards.
Yeah.
Okay, and Andy's asking, has buffalo grass invaded northern Arizona, or is it mostly a desert invader? Yes, it's mostly desert. I seldom see it make it much over 3,000 to 3,500 feet. So we don't have it in globe yet, but it's down in Tonto Basin. It's down there Superior Way. But no, it doesn't make it up those elevations. And Joe says exactly what I want to say. Thanks for such an interesting presentation. We're going to bring this to a close. Thank you so much, everybody, for your interesting questions. I don't have my December presentations planned yet. I may very well be your presenter. So with that, Gail, thank you. Everybody, if you can give the little hands up, says tell her thank you. I hope everybody enjoys their Thanksgiving Day, which is next Thursday. So we are definitely taking a break next week. And I want to wish everybody have a good day, and we'll see you at the next program.